My English breakthrough, the day everything finally made sense. Have you ever felt like English just doesn't click, no matter how hard you study? What if there was a moment, a breakthrough, where suddenly everything made sense? In today's episode, we dive into one learner's powerful story of frustration, persistence, and a surprising turning point that changed everything. This is not just a story. It's a roadmap for anyone who feels stuck and wants to move forward in their English journey. The first time I picked up an English book, I felt like I was staring at a wall of codes, symbols and sounds I couldn't understand, let alone use. I remember the feeling clearly, a mix of frustration and curiosity, like trying to solve a puzzle where most of the pieces were missing. It wasn't that I lacked motivation. I had the desire. I had the notebooks. I had the apps. I even had the dreams of fluently speaking with ease and charm. But no matter how many grammar rules I memorized or how many vocabulary words I wrote down, I still felt like a foreigner in the world of English. Every day, I would listen to podcasts and videos, trying to catch a phrase or mimic a tone, but it was like grabbing water with bare hands. It kept slipping through. I understood some words, yes, but never the full meaning. My responses were slow, my confidence shaky, and the moment someone spoke quickly, my brain froze. I began to wonder if maybe some people were just born to be bilingual, and I wasn't one of them. The worst part wasn't the mistakes, it was the silence. The way I'd open my mouth to say something in English and then close it again, unsure of how to begin. I'd rehearse whole sentences in my head, only to find they sounded strange. When I finally said them out loud, I would translate everything, word by word, from my native language. And we both know that's not how English works. But something happened. Not suddenly like lightning, but gradually like dawn breaking through a dark sky. The breakthrough didn't come from a course or a book. It came from frustration, from that deep, burning desire to finally stop being a learner and start being a user of the language. It came from letting go of the fear of mistakes and choosing fluency over perfection. I changed one small thing that made all the difference. I started thinking in English. Not perfectly, not all day, just for moments. I would describe what I was doing in English, like, I am walking to the store, or I need to cook lunch. At first, it felt forced, but I kept doing it. I talked to myself while cleaning, while eating, even while lying in bed. Slowly, English became less of a subject I studied and more of a language I lived. Then came a day that I'll never forget. I was in a park, and a tourist came up to ask for directions. Without hesitation, I replied in English. Not perfect, not fancy, but clear, natural, and smooth. The look on their face, the way they nodded and thanked me, it made me feel something I hadn't felt in months. Pride. That was the day everything clicked. That was the day I felt the breakthrough. Looking back, it wasn't about one method or one book. It was about consistent, imperfect effort. About surrounding myself with English in small, daily ways until the pieces started to fit. It was about building not just vocabulary, but trust in myself. Trust that I could learn, that I could grow, that I could speak. Not like a native, but like myself. From that moment on, I saw English differently. Not as a school subject, but as a living part of my world. I watched movies not to study them, but to enjoy them. I read books not to analyze, but to feel. I listened to conversations with curiosity, not pressure. And best of all, I started speaking more. Without fear, without shame, without apology. This story isn't just about me. It's about you, and everyone who feels like English is a locked door. The key isn't fluency, it's persistence. It's showing up every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. It's choosing progress over perfection. Connection over correctness. There were still days when I stumbled, when I forgot words or mixed tenses. But now, I laugh them off. Because I knew I was no longer outside the language, trying to get in. I was inside, living it. The breakthrough came not when I knew all the rules, but when I stopped being afraid to break them. When I realized that communication is not about perfect grammar, but about understanding and being understood. And that day in the park? That was just the beginning. After that breakthrough in the park, something shifted inside me. I started to believe, not just hope, that I could become truly fluent in English. Not perfect, not native-like, but fluent in the real sense. The ability to understand, think, and respond with ease and confidence. That belief changed everything. I became less interested in memorizing grammar rules and more curious about how people really spoke. I noticed their intonation, their pauses, their casual phrases. I started imitating not just their words, but their rhythm, their style. I wasn't trying to pass a test anymore. I was trying to join a conversation. One major thing I began doing was shadowing. I'd listen to native speakers and repeat after them, almost like singing along to music. At first, it was tough. I couldn't keep up. But I kept trying. I'd rewind, pause, mimic. Again and again. Over time, I started matching their tone, their pitch, their fluency. My tongue got used to English sounds. My brain stopped translating. My confidence grew, not because I was learning faster, but because I was learning deeper. I also changed how I listened. Before, I would listen passively, just letting the words wash over me, hoping something would stick. But after my breakthrough, I became an active listener. I listened with a pencil in hand, writing down interesting phrases, expressions, and pronunciation quirks. I didn't write everything, just the things that caught my attention. I treated English like a living thing I was trying to befriend, not a subject to conquer. I realized that the problem wasn't my intelligence. It was my approach. I had spent so much time trying to study English instead of trying to use it. I was a great test taker, but a poor communicator. That had to change. So I stopped focusing so much on correctness and focused more on connection. Could I make someone laugh? Could I express my feelings? Could I share a story? That became my new goal. One trick that helped me was journaling in English. Every night I'd write about my day, what I did, what I felt, what I learned. At first, it took forever. I'd get stuck on words, but I refused to switch back to my native language. If I didn't know a word, I'd describe it in other words. It forced me to think in English, to stretch my vocabulary naturally. Slowly, writing became easier. Then speaking became easier. It was all connected. Another surprising thing that helped was reading out loud. Every day, I'd pick a paragraph from a book or article and read it aloud. Not just for pronunciation, but for fluency. I wanted the words to roll off my tongue. I wanted to feel the rhythm of English. I even recorded myself and listened back. Not to criticize, but to observe. I celebrated my improvements, no matter how small. Perhaps the most powerful tool I used was imagination. I'd imagine conversations before they happened. I'd picture myself ordering food, asking questions, making friends, all in English. I rehearsed them in my mind like scenes in a play. So, when real moments came, I wasn't paralyzed. I'd already lived them in my head. This mental practice was more useful than I ever expected. I also began talking to myself, not in a crazy way, but in a constructive one. I'd narrate what I was doing. Now I'm making coffee. It smells good. I need to send an email after this. It might seem silly, but it trained my brain to generate English thoughts automatically. It created an internal English voice that eventually became my default. Of course, there were setbacks, days when I felt like I wasn't improving, times when native speakers didn't understand me, moments when I made embarrassing mistakes. But I stopped letting those moments define me. I treated them like steps, not failures. I reminded myself, babies fall before they walk. And I was still learning to walk in English. One time, I joined an online group chat with learners and native speakers. I was terrified. But I introduced myself. I asked questions. I laughed. And I realized something. Most people are not judging your English. They're just happy you're trying. That changed my attitude forever. I stopped hiding. I started showing up. Listening played a huge role in this transformation. Not just hearing words, but feeling them. Understanding their weight, their tone, their intention. I listened to podcasts like this one, stories of real people learning English, facing challenges, celebrating victories. Those voices became part of my world. They made me feel less alone. I began to see patterns. How native speakers used actually to soften disagreement. How they said, you know, to invite connection. How sort of and kind of made things sound less direct. I absorbed these details not from textbooks, but from real conversations. My English became more natural, not robotic or stiff, but flexible and human. I also started to let go of shame. For years, I felt ashamed of my accent, my pauses, my grammar slips. But after the breakthrough, I realized that clarity mattered more than perfection. That being understood was more important than sounding flawless. That authenticity beat accuracy every time. I learned to celebrate small wins, a day without translating, a conversation without fear, a sentence spoken smoothly. These were victories. I didn't need applause. I just needed to notice them. Progress is quiet. It's built in moments, not milestones. What I didn't realize at first is that English was not the goal. Connection was. Growth was. Confidence was. English was just the tool. And the more I used it, the more I grew, not just as a language learner, but as a person. I had spent years trying to open a door that felt locked. But it wasn't locked. I just hadn't found the right key. That key was daily, fearless use. It was making English part of my life, not just my studies. And as I moved forward, I knew one thing for sure. The breakthrough wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new kind of journey, one built on joy, persistence, and real human connection. That new journey felt different from the years before. It wasn't about climbing a ladder anymore. It was about walking a path. A path filled with new voices, new questions, and new insights. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying to understand, to connect, to express. And every day, English felt a little less foreign and a little more like home. One of the best things I ever did was build an English-only environment for myself. It wasn't easy. My native language was everywhere. My family, my notifications, my news. But I made a decision. I would create a personal English bubble. I changed my phone language. I followed English-speaking creators. I subscribed to English newsletters. My social media became my classroom. My entertainment became my teacher. I also started thinking in English more consistently. Not just when I was studying, but while walking, cooking, showering. I'd describe things in English. I'd reflect in English. It was awkward at first, like wearing new shoes. But I kept doing it until it became natural. English became the voice in my mind, not just the words in my books. I discovered that learning a language isn't just about language, it's about identity. When I spoke English, I felt different. Not fake, just slightly transformed. More curious, more expressive, more confident. It was like trying on a new version of myself, one that could navigate different worlds and connect with people I never could before. I learned to enjoy mistakes. I know that sounds strange, but hear me out. Every mistake was proof that I was trying. It meant I was stretching, growing, risking. When I misused a word or got confused, I didn't say I failed. I said, I practiced. That shift in mindset changed everything. I stopped feeling embarrassed and started feeling brave. And I realized something even more powerful. Fluency doesn't mean never pausing or never searching for words. It means flowing through those pauses without panic. It means knowing how to keep the conversation going, even when you don't know everything. It means adapting, not freezing. And that, to me, was real fluency. Another tool that accelerated my progress was storytelling. I started telling short stories in English. Sometimes they were about my childhood, sometimes about my daily life, sometimes totally made up. But I told them out loud, to my mirror, to my journal, sometimes to friends. This trained my brain to build sentences, not just repeat them. It gave me creative control over the language. I also noticed a strange shift in my listening. I could understand faster. Not because my ears had changed, but because my expectations had. I started predicting meaning. My brain stopped translating and started anticipating. I could feel what was coming. That intuitive sense of English wasn't something I studied. It was something I earned through exposure and repetition. I began noticing how culture and language danced together. How American humor was often sarcastic, how British English used understatement, how certain words had emotional weight in one culture and not in another. I became not just a learner of words, but a learner of worlds. And that made English richer, deeper, more alive. I got comfortable with silence. I used to panic if I didn't respond immediately in English. But I learned to pause, to breathe, to collect my thoughts. Native speakers do this all the time. I didn't need to rush. I needed to be present. That small shift helped me communicate with calmness and clarity. There was one phrase that became my motto: progress, not perfection. It reminded me that every small step mattered. That fluency wasn't built in leaps, it was built in layers. One conversation, one sentence, one word at a time. That mindset kept me moving forward, especially on hard days. Some days, I felt stuck. My progress felt invisible. But then I'd look back, just a few months, and realize how far I'd come. That's the magic of consistency. You don't always feel the growth, but it's happening silently, faithfully, underneath the surface. I found comfort in routines. I created an English morning ritual, a short podcast, a quick journaling session, and 5 minutes of reading. It was simple, but powerful. It anchored my day in English. It reminded me that fluency was a lifestyle, not an event. And I started helping others. I joined language forums, answered questions, shared tips. Teaching made me stronger. It forced me to reflect on what I'd learned and how I'd learned it. It reminded me that we're all students and teachers, and the journey is better when shared. One of the most important lessons I learned was this: motivation fades, but habits stay. I didn't wake up excited every day. But I showed up anyway. Because I had built systems, not just goals. I had created a life where English was normal, not special. That's when real change began. I also gave myself permission to rest. To enjoy English without always studying it. To laugh at sitcoms. To sing songs badly. To play with words. Learning should be joyful. If it's always pressure, it becomes a burden. But when it's playful, it becomes a passion. Eventually, something beautiful happened. I stopped noticing I was speaking English. It just happened. Conversations flowed. Ideas came. My brain didn't freeze. I didn't feel like a student. I felt like a communicator. And that was the ultimate victory. But I knew the journey didn't end there. Fluency isn't a destination. It's a practice, a relationship, something you nurture, revisit, and refine. And just like any relationship, it grows with love, attention, and time. I wasn't fluent because I knew every word. I was fluent because I stopped fearing the ones I didn't know. I was fluent because I kept going, even when it was hard. Because I turned my breakthrough into a lifestyle. Because I fell in love with the process. And maybe that's the secret no one tells you. The journey itself is the reward. The person you become along the way is more valuable than any certificate or exam score. This is how English became more than a language for me. It became a lens, a bridge, a mirror. And that all started the day I believed I could do it. Not perfectly, but fully. That moment of realization, where everything made sense, wasn't about grammar or vocabulary or pronunciation. It was about belief. The belief that I didn't need to be perfect to belong. That my voice mattered even if it wasn't flawless. That learning English was not about chasing approval, but about creating connection. That was the true breakthrough. I started seeing English as a tool, not a test. A way to explore, not just to perform. I read articles not for practice, but for ideas. I listened to podcasts not to study, but to understand different perspectives. I stopped asking, "Is my English good enough?" and started asking, "What do I want to say?" That simple shift unlocked my fluency faster than any textbook ever did. I began to write more. Not formal essays, but personal notes, journal entries, reflections. I'd write letters to my future self. I'd write about my dreams, my worries, my plans. Writing helped me find my voice. It slowed me down just enough to see how words worked together. And over time, my written English became more honest, more natural, more mine. My listening grew sharper too. I didn't just hear words. I heard tone, emotion, intention. I started noticing how people sounded when they were curious, or sarcastic, or vulnerable. This helped me in conversations. I didn't just respond to the words. They became signals that guided my empathy. English was becoming my second instinct. The fear of forgetting words or making mistakes slowly disappeared. Not because I became perfect, but because I realized that communication is about meaning, not mechanics. I could forget a word and still keep the conversation alive. I could make a grammar slip and still make a new friend. I became less focused on impressing and more focused on expressing. I learned the beauty of silence, that not every pause is a problem. Sometimes silence gives space. Space to think. Space to listen. Space to grow. In my early days, I rushed to fill silence, afraid it meant failure. But now, I used silence as a tool to breathe, to process, to connect more deeply. I fell in love with expressions, those colorful phrases that don't translate perfectly. It's raining cats and dogs. Bite the bullet. Hit the nail on the head. These little gems brought English alive for me. They were pieces of culture, wrapped in rhythm. They made my speech sparkle. And I loved how native speakers smiled when I used them correctly. I started mentoring new learners. I'd share my story, my struggles, my systems. It felt amazing to tell someone, "Yes, I understand. I've been there. Keep going. It's worth it." Helping others made my own progress feel even more meaningful. It turned my pain into purpose. I kept refining my accent, not to erase my identity, but to increase clarity. I wanted people to focus on my message, not my mispronunciations. I practiced with tongue twisters. I mimicked voices. I slowed down and paid attention to the shape of sounds. My accent became more neutral, but still uniquely mine. I also realized that motivation is fragile. It comes and goes. But discipline, daily habits, small wins, consistent effort, that's what builds fluency. I had bad days, lazy weeks, even moments of doubt. But I had systems in place, systems that brought me back. Systems that didn't depend on emotion, only on commitment. I stopped comparing myself to others. Some people learned faster. Some had more exposure. Some had better memory. But their path was not my path. I celebrated their success, but I focused on my growth. Comparison is a thief of joy. Progress is personal. I even made peace with boredom. Not every lesson is thrilling. Not every podcast is exciting. But I showed up. Like going to the gym on a rainy day, I trained my brain even when I didn't feel like it. And those boring sessions often led to the biggest leaps. Because they built discipline, and discipline breeds fluency. I created rituals for speaking. I'd warm up with easy phrases. I'd rehearse aloud before meetings. I'd read poems and lyrics to stretch my pronunciation. I turned speaking into a daily workout, not a special event. My tongue became stronger, my nerves became calmer, and my message became clearer. I stopped hiding. I used to avoid phone calls, video chats, public speaking. But now I leaned into them. I sought them out. Because real practice means real interaction. I fumbled, I paused, I restarted, but I didn't quit. And each conversation made me bolder, not just better. And I kept learning, always. New idioms, new styles, new topics. English became my lifelong companion, not a box to check. I subscribed to new podcasts. I watched documentaries. I discussed ideas in comment sections. Learning became a lifestyle, not a phase. Most importantly, I forgave myself. For the years I wasted, for the fears I fed, for the times I said, "I'll never be good at this." I released that shame, because now I saw the truth. Every moment spent doubting was still a part of the journey, still a step toward fluency. And that's the story I share with you. Not of perfection, but of progress. Not of a shortcut, but of a shift. A mental shift that made English a part of who I am, not just something I learned. So if you're in the middle of your journey and it feels slow, or confusing, or overwhelming, keep going. Don't wait for magic. Create your breakthrough. One step, one story, one sentence at a time. Because the day everything finally made sense didn't arrive like lightning. It came through quiet consistency, through messy progress, through daily courage, through love for the language. And now, every time I speak, I carry that journey with me. Every word I say, every idea I share, it's proof that I made it. Not to the end, but to the beginning of something beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If this story inspired or encouraged you in any way, please consider sharing it with a fellow language learner. And don't forget, your breakthrough moment is closer than you think. Keep going, and let English become your superpower.